Ezra Levant here at the Lethbridge Courthouse. It's Wednesday morning. I'm on the second day of pre-trial hearings for the so-called Coutts 4, two of whom have actually accepted relatively minor plea bargains, so they're no longer in court. They're free men walking out of jail after 2 years in confinement. Two more still are in prison and on trial. Tony Olenek and Chris Carbert. Rebel News has set up a special crowdfund to help Chris Carbert at helpchris.ca. Those funds are different from our regular crowdfunding money because, of course, the charges here are very serious. They're not ordinary civil liberties style peaceful disobedience like Tamara Leach did, or thousands of other protesters. They, maybe had a minor mischief charge. These were heavy charges, including conspiracy to commit murder of a police officer. The reason we set up the new crowdfund is because I believe that in the course of the last 2 years, it looks more and more like the men were overcharged, like the prosecution and the police press conference to announce it were actually a political pretext to give Justin Trudeau some sort of factual basis upon which to declare the Emergencies Act. Other revelations over the course of the 2 years, including the easy plea bargain given to the two men. I mean, it's not easy, but it's easy compared to what they would face if convicted, have convinced me that there's a lot of politics at play here, more than normal. It's interesting who is in the courtroom. They have the hearing in quite a small room, and there's a large community interest in this trial, but most people are forced to stand in the hallways, and that agitates the prosecutor, lead prosecutor Stephen Johnston. He complained to the judge of all these rabble in the hallway, and he asked the judge for an extra 5 minutes to be tacked on to breaks so he could walk around them. It was a really pitiful whine, but it shows how thin-skinned and how much of a vendetta Stephen Johnston has. I'm sure in his own mind he thinks he's upholding justice, but he's obsessed with getting any lockdown deviant, anyone who broke a rule. These are serious charges here, but he was also the lawyer in the Arthur Pavlovsky prosecutions. If I'm not mistaken, he was the lawyer in the Whistle Stop Cafe prosecutions. This guy is basically a hunter-killer unit who's using millions of dollars of government resources to go after people who disagreed with the lockdowns. He really is a zealot, and I think at a certain point in time, the personal ambitions and grudges of a prosecutor become a public policy problem. If you have a prosecutor who's motivated by a rage or a political enemies list, I think he's no longer serving the public interest. Not just the 2 years in prison for the four men, but the enormous court resources, the enormous police resources. We see all across Canada many cases being thrown out for want of prosecution. I'm not just talking about lockdown cases. I'm talking about serious violent crimes. In Toronto, there was recently a case where a man was convicted of rape, one of the most horrendous crimes in the criminal code, and yet he was allowed right out of jail because of, in part, the lockdowns and the shutdowns seized up the whole legal system. And so in Canada, you have a constitutional right to a speedy trial. That man was a guilty rapist, but he got to go because he argued that he had too slow justice. Imagine clogging up the courts with political prosecutions from 2012, 2022, 2023, or even earlier, and letting violent criminals go. It's astonishing, and it happens not just in Toronto, but here in Alberta and in BC. It's outrageous. It's interesting to see the crowd that gathers here. You can see some of the signs behind me, and one of my favorite things to look at is the Freedom vehicles, keeping with the spirit of the convoy. You can see some of them are really decked out with bumper stickers and flags. I love how the Freedom movement uses the Canadian flag as a symbol. Sometimes the flag is flown upside down, which is a typical signal of distress. And if you ever see a ship with a flag upside down, it's giving the signal that there is distress aboard. But generally, I think that the Freedom Movement takes the flag and says, we're the true Canadians. We believe in freedom. It's interesting because I remember it wasn't too long ago where the flag was basically absorbed as a symbol of the Liberal Party of Canada, where if you are a patriot, you are a liberal. I think the opposite is true now. Of course, there are those F. Trudeau flags everywhere, which I get a real kick out of, and I don't know if I'd have the courage to be the creator of those, but whoever did is probably a millionaire now. Good for him. I'm going to be going into the hearing today, but unfortunately, So much of it is covered by a pretrial publication ban. As you know, we're reviewing the search warrants and the execution of those search warrants that led to so much of the evidence being used against the four men. And in this pretrial hearing, the defense lawyers are challenging the legal validity of the search warrant. And if they can knock it out either by saying the search warrant was granted improperly, or it was granted properly, but it was executed improperly. There's several ways you could block a search warrant. Then the evidence that is yielded from that search warrant would be fruit of a poisoned tree, as they say, and inadmissible, and that would likely scupper the government's case. Now, I have no idea where the judge's head is at. He's somewhat inscrutable to me, as judges should be. It would be quite a dramatic thing for the judge at this hour to throw out the search warrants or its fruits on the eve of trial after 2 years. Frankly, I think that's a really uphill battle, but we'll see. The judge did have a lot of questions for the prosecutor yesterday about, there were several search warrants for different pieces of property. The information to obtain that search warrant is covered by a publication ban, which makes it very difficult to talk about. Certain portions of the publication ban have been set aside because other journalists for the mainstream media actually applied to modify the publication ban. But most of what they're talking about are details that I just can't share. It's a very frustrating feeling to be sitting in court, hearing very interesting and in some cases scandalous facts, but being unable to talk about them because that could, impact a hearing, because these facts that are being bandied about are not yet tested by the court. So it's a frustrating thing. Today, two of the police officers who helped put together the information to obtain that search warrant will be testifying and will be cross-examined. Again, it seems to me that maybe ought to have been something that was done years ago rather than now, but better late than never. I note that the lawyers who are in the court, in one case, the lawyer for Tony Olnick is brand new on the file, Marilyn Burns, not a criminal lawyer by practice, a civil lawyer, a political lawyer. I'm not sure. She's got 2 years of catching up to do. I'm slightly worried about that. We'll see how it goes. I'll be here live tweeting throughout the day, and I'll do some video updates at the lunch break and afterwards, but I'm not sure how valuable